Welcome to the next installment of my video lecture series for microeconomic principles. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be reviewing one of the potential questions or multiple questions that can appear on test number 1. And in particular, I'm going to be taking a look at this particular question. Realize that this particular question has 4 different scenarios, so that means there are 4 different ways that this question could be asked. So starting with the market in equilibrium, graphically illustrate the change in equilibrium price and quantity for the following scenario. An increase/decrease, meaning I could ask you for an increase or a decrease in the wording of the problem, in the price of a related good. When the goods are substitutes/complements, meaning I could ask you again for either one of those 2 scenarios. Explain your answer in detail. So as with every other potential problem I talked about previously, starting with the market in equilibrium should look like this. You should have the axes labeled, the y-axis price, the x-axis quantity. You should have an upward sloping supply curve, a downward sloping demand curve. The supply curve is upward sloping because of the law of supply, which states that there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. And we have a downward sloping demand curve because of the law of demand, which states there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. The equilibrium occurs where supply and demand intersect one another, so that gives us the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So the first scenario we're going to take a look at is that where the goods are substitutes, and we're going to see that there's an increase in the price of good A. So if A and B are substitutes, and this is the market for B, an increase in the price of good A is going to cause people to substitute away from good A and buy good B. So more people are going to want to buy good B at the prevailing prices. So this demand curve is going to shift to the right. So we're going to have a new demand curve that's to the right of the original demand curve. And let me make that a solid line. And let's make this D0. We want to be able to accurately reflect which one is the original demand curve. So D0 is the original demand curve. I could take this and duplicate it, move it up, and relabel this as demand curve 1. And it would probably also be helpful to have a line indicating that there's a shift to the demand curve. So we have that line, and let me change that to that. And a line here. And let's put an arrow at the end of each. So we're showing the shift from this demand curve to this demand curve. So the movement from this demand curve to this demand curve is because of the fact that the price of good A increased and B and A are substitutes. Therefore, people are going to move away from good A and buy more of good B. So what is going to occur with the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity? Well, we're going to be at a new equilibrium point. It's going to be where these 2 intersect one another. So from that point right there, no, that does not. I did not grab that point accurately. There we go. So that point there will give us the new equilibrium price. So we will label that P1 to signify that this is related to the new demand curve D1. And we will have the same thing for equilibrium quantity. We go from that equilibrium point straight down. And we label that Q1 to signify that that is the new equilibrium after the shift of demand curve D0 to D1. So what is going to be our prediction? Our prediction is going to be that because the price of A increased, good A, and because A and B are substitutes, that's going to increase the demand for good B. So this shift is caused by the increase in the price of A and the fact that goods A and B are substitutes. People substitute away from good A and are buying good B. That's causing the demand curve to shift to the right. We have a new equilibrium where the new demand curve intersects the original supply curve, and that gives us the new equilibrium price and the new equilibrium quantity, and that reflects an increase in both the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. Let's take a look at a different scenario, and let's change this from the goods being substitutes to being complements. And instead of this being an increase in the price of good A, let's actually have this being a decrease in the price of good A. So what we see occurring is that there's a decrease in the price of good A, and A and B are complements. They are used together. So if the price of A is going down, it's going to be cheaper to use good B. So we're going to end up having the same graph as we had previously. So because of the fact that these goods are complements, this is the market for good B. If the price of A goes down, that makes it less expensive for us to consume good B, so the demand for good B is also going to increase. So this is going to cause the price to increase of good B and the quantity, the equilibrium quantity to increase of good B. So make sure you're aware of that in a scenario where we have an increase in the price of A and there are substitutes, the demand curve shifts to the right, and it looks identical to if there's a decrease in the price and they are complements of one another. So make sure you're aware of that graphically they look exactly the same. Let's change this now to that there's an increase in the price of good A. And we'll keep them as being complements. And let me delete some of this information so we can start from an equilibrium point here. Excuse the delay here. Let me get rid of this and let me relabel this as D0 because this is going to be our new original demand curve. And we're going to have P0 and P1 signifying that these are the original equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So again, we are talking about a market for good B, and that A and B are complements, that they're being used together. So if the price of good A goes up, it's going to be more expensive to consume good B because they have a tendency to be used together. Therefore, the demand curve will shift to the left. So we will have a demand curve that looks like this. And let me copy this. So there's the original demand curve, and now we have a new demand curve that this shift is being caused by the fact that there's an increase in the price of good A, and goods A and B are complements for one another. Again, you may want to put arrows in here to show that the demand curve is shifting to the left. Do the same thing, let's say, over here. All right, so the shift from demand curve D0 to D1 is caused by the fact that you have an increase in the price of good A, and goods A and B are complements. So the demand curve shifts to the left. Now we have to find the new equilibrium, and the new equilibrium is going to occur where the new demand curve D1 intersects the original supply curve. So this point right here, I guess I can just drop in a real quick point there, is going to be the new equilibrium point. And to find the equilibrium price, I just go from that point over. And I go from the equilibrium point straight down to get the equilibrium quantity. And for brevity's sake, I'll just copy and paste this price 0, rename it price 1, and do the same thing for Q1, Q0 and Q1. Let me get rid of that. Let me delete that. And this is going to be Q1. So what's our prediction as to what's going to happen with the price? So if the price of good A increases and A and B are complements, then we will see the demand curve shift to the left. The new equilibrium will be at a lower price and a lower quantity. Let me change this scenario around again and change them from complements to substitutes, and also have this being a decrease in the price. We end up getting the same exact graph because if there is a decrease in the price of good A, and this is the market for good B, people will substitute away from B and over to A because of the fact that A is less expensive to B and they can be substituted for one another. So now B is more expensive to A, therefore people will shift from buying B and buying A, so the demand for good B will shift to the left. and we will see a decrease in the equilibrium price and a decrease in the equilibrium quantity in the marketplace.